If you're into gripping sci-fi stories where humans dominate the impossible and even beasts kneel to their will, then stop what you're doing and hit that like button. Comment what you would have done if this monster was hunting you, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss how this epic twist unfolds. Now let's dive in. The moon was dead. Its surface cracked like old bone beneath the weight of ancient wars and forgotten prisoners. The sky was a smear of burnt rust, the kind that never changed no matter how long you stared at it. Somewhere, deep inside the hollowed ruins of what used to be Cernix 9's command complex, a fire crackled low, fed with scraps of insulation foam and broken furniture. The man tending it didn't speak. He hadn't spoken in days. Commander Rourke had once commanded fleets. Now he was alone, marooned on a penal moon orbiting a dying red star. No guards. No fences. No other prisoners left alive. Just silence and wind that sounded too much like breathing. They said exile would break him. That solitude would bend his spine, crush his will. But the Zarn Dominion had underestimated humans before, and they were about to do it again. Because the man they thought they'd buried was still standing, still watching, still fighting in his own way. The first clue came in the form of silence. The wind stopped. The constant groan of shifting metal ceased. Even the vermin that had made a nest in the reactor chamber went quiet. That was wrong. Rourke straightened, one hand hovering over the makeshift spear he'd fashioned out of a snapped utility pole and a rebar shard. His breath clouded in the stale air, too fast, too loud. Then came the smell. Sure. Metallic. Like blood smeared across cold steel. He didn't run. Running made noise. Running told predators you were prey. Instead, he lowered his body slowly, silently, and moved into the shadows cast by the flickering flame. He felt it before he saw it. Not footsteps, not breathing, not even heat. Just a presence. Like being stared at through a sniper's scope. As if something far more ancient than war had just decided to make him its meal. There was a whisper of air. Then a sudden crash. Metal tore free from the wall behind him, and he flung himself to the side just in time to avoid a blur of darkness crashing through. Concrete exploded. A low, bone-rattling growl reverberated through the chamber. Dust swirled like mist, obscuring everything. Rourke scrambled behind an overturned cryopod, heart hammering in his chest. A shape moved through the cloud. Not walking, stalking. The glow of twin blue eyes sliced through the haze, unblinking, alive with something deeper than instinct. Hunger, yes, but also thought. Then it vanished. Not away, closer. Above. Rourke looked up too late. The beast dropped with the weight of a truck, claws screeching off metal as it landed in a crouch just feet from him. It didn't roar. It didn't lunge. It waited. 7 feet tall at the shoulder. Midnight black fur, matted with strange silver circuitry. Fangs like daggers jutting from a muzzle designed for killing. But it was the eyes that held him. Not just feral. Curious. The Dominion had sent the biohound. He had heard of it, rumors traded between dying prisoners and broken soldiers. A living weapon built in labs older than language. Programmed to eliminate problems too inconvenient for politics. Too dangerous for public trials. And now it had been sent for him. He held his breath. Moved nothing. The biohound stepped forward once. Then again. Its breath steamed through the dark. The air between them buzzed with tension, with inevitability. This was it. The kill order had been given. So why hadn't it attacked? It tilted its head slightly, the way dogs do when they hear a new sound. It sniffed. Took in his scent. Then its lip curled back, not in aggression but in something stranger. Confusion. As if the target in front of it didn't match what it had been told. Rourke raised his spear, slow and deliberate. Well, he said quietly, voice raspy from disuse, get on with it then. The biohound tensed. Every muscle coiled. Rourke braced. It pounced. He rolled beneath the swipe, using its momentum to drive the spear upward. The metal caught flesh. It wasn't much, just a graze, but the beast howled and whipped around, smashing its tail into his side and sending him crashing against the wall. Ribs cracked. Pain flared. Still he rose. The biohound didn't press the attack. It stood there watching him. Blood dripped from its flank. And in that moment something passed between them. Not words. Not understanding. But something close. It turned and vanished into the smoke without a sound. Rourke slumped down, clutching his side, coughing blood into his hand. His lungs burned. His vision blurred. But he was alive. And that didn't make sense. He waited the whole night, back to the wall, spear at the ready. The beast didn't return. Morning came with a thin streak of pale light crawling across the floor. The wind resumed. Life continued. But nothing felt normal. The second encounter came 3 days later. Rourke had left the control tower ruins to scavenge a derelict weather station half a click south. Supplies were low. Water purifier failing. Food running out. He knew the biohound was still out there. Following. Waiting. But he couldn't afford to sit still. He found the station half buried in rock and ash. Spent 2 hours forcing the emergency hatch open. Inside, the shelves were mostly stripped bare. A few ration bars. A cracked battery. He pocketed them all, then turned to leave. There in the doorway stood the beast. No snarl. No ambush. Just stillness. Rourke didn't raise his weapon this time. "You stalking me," he said flatly, "or are you just curious what a dead man eats?" The biohound growled low in its throat but didn't move. The wound on its side had crusted over. He could see now that it breathed irregularly, fast and shallow. It was injured worse than it let on. He took a step forward. The biohound flinched. Just slightly. Another step. Still no lunge. "Didn't think they programmed fear into you things," he muttered. Then he did something insane. He reached into his jacket, tore off a strip of clean cloth, and tossed it gently onto the floor between them. The beast stared down at it. Then back up. Then stepped aside. Let him pass. Rourke walked out of the station slowly, expecting to be gutted at any second. But the biohound just stood there watching. That night, when he returned to camp, something was waiting by the fire. Half a carcass. Some kind of lunar hare, skinned and placed neatly beside his cooking gear. Rourke stared at it for a long time. Then he cooked it. He didn't speak to the darkness that night. Didn't pretend he wasn't rattled. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't dream of being hunted. He dreamed of eyes that didn't just see prey. The wind howled. Far off, something massive moved through the ruins. It didn't come close. But it didn't leave either. And Rourke, for the first time in months, felt something other than hatred in his chest. He felt curiosity. And the beast, it hadn't finished watching him yet. The cold had lost its sting. After weeks surviving on instinct, pain and silence, Rourke found his body adapting to the bite of nightfall, the hunger in his gut, the ache in his ribs. But what gnawed deeper than the wounds was the awareness that he was no longer alone, and hadn't been for some time. He didn't mention the biohound aloud anymore, not even as a joke. That false sense of superiority had burned off after their first meeting. Now he watched for it the way soldiers watched for snipers. Never directly but always. It came back the next night. Not charging or circling like before. It approached slowly out of the mist, steps heavy but measured, calculated. Rourke sat by the fire again, hands extended to the heat, the makeshift spear across his knees. His eyes didn't flinch. The biohound halted 3 meters away and dropped something. A hunk of raw meat. Still steaming. Still twitching. "You want to eat together now?" Rourke asked, voice low, devoid of sarcasm. "That it?" The beast didn't answer. Of course it didn't. But it didn't leave either. Rourke reached down, picked up the meat and tossed it into the fire. As it sizzled, the biohound stepped forward and lay down, never breaking eye contact. Hours passed. Neither moved. The wind blew dust through the gaps in the old satellite housing around them. The moon's red sky bled slowly into black. The meat charred. Rourke ate it without seasoning, without thanks. The biohound watched every bite. "You understand something," Rourke muttered finally. "That's the problem. You're not just a killer. You're watching. Waiting." He glanced at the silver-lined eyes. "You want to learn." He didn't expect it to respond, but something in its posture shifted. The ears didn't go flat. The chest didn't rise in threat. No growl. Just stillness. Receptiveness. The Dominion hadn't built an animal. They'd built something worse. Something curious. He stood slowly. The biohound didn't flinch. "You could have gutted me twice already," Rourke said. "So why haven't you?" The wind answered for it. But that night, it didn't vanish into the shadows. It remained nearby, just outside the light. And Rourke, for reasons he didn't understand, didn't sleep with his spear in hand. The next morning he left the camp to search the East Ridge. Solar panels had been mounted there years ago before the war reduced them to shattered mirrors. He figured he could salvage a few capacitor coils, maybe enough to jumpstart the atmospheric heater buried beneath the old barracks. Climbing the ridge was harder than expected. His ribs screamed. Breathing was shallow. But he kept moving. Humans did that. They moved, they bled, they adapted. They didn't wait to be devoured. Halfway up the incline, he heard the scuffle of paws behind him. No ambush this time. No pretense. It was just following. He turned to look. The biohound froze halfway up the slope. Eyes locked. Go back, Rourke said. I don't need a shadow. It didn't move. He sighed and turned back to climbing. It followed at a distance. When he reached the ridge's summit, he found the solar array completely collapsed. Panels bent and tangled like broken spiderwebs. He pried one open, ripped out the insides and shoved a few parts into his pouch. When he turned around, the beast was there, sniffing one of the melted batteries. Don't lick that, Rourke muttered. Unless you want to fry your own tongue. The biohound looked at him, tilted its head again and moved back. He sat on the ledge and exhaled. Below them, the remains of Cernix 9 sprawled like a graveyard. Broken towers. Collapsed bunkers. A field of rusting transport husks scattered like dead beetles. It should have looked desolate. It should have looked hopeless. But with the beast sitting beside him, silent and massive, Rourke felt something entirely different. He felt watched. But not hunted. He stood and started back down the slope. The biohound followed. That night he didn't cook the meat. He left it raw and tossed a strip toward the creature. It caught it midair with reflexes so fast they didn't seem real. The motion was clean, efficient. Not ravenous. You were made to obey, Rourke said, chewing slowly. They gave you orders. Programming. You think I'm a target? The biohound blinked. Then finished the job. Silence. You can't, Rourke said. Because I didn't run. He wasn't sure why he said that. Maybe he needed to say it out loud. Maybe he was testing a theory. Predators chased prey. That was the law of nature. But what happened when the prey didn't run? What happened when it stood its ground, bloodied and defiant? The Dominion thought domination came from superior firepower, precision engineering and unquestioned obedience. But they had forgotten the first law of survival. The apex predator isn't the one who kills fastest. It's the one who endures longest. He took a stick, dragged a line in the dirt between them. Cross this, he said. And we fight. The biohound stared at the line. Then it lay down behind it. No growl. No challenge. Just silence. Rourke nodded. Good. From then on it slept there. Close enough to hear his breath. Far enough to respect the line. Day by day the line disappeared, covered in ash, eroded by wind. But neither of them drew it again. He began talking to it, not out of madness or loneliness, but because something in its eyes told him it was listening. Not understanding every word, maybe, but parsing intent. Tone. Patterns. He told it stories. Of Earth. Of jungle warfare and zero-G sieges. Of betrayals and commands he wouldn't follow. Of the civilians he refused to burn, the lie he refused to tell, the Dominion order he spit on before they stripped his rank and dumped him on this forgotten moon. They called it insubordination, he said, feeding the fire one night. I called it being human. The biohound huffed quietly, a sound that almost resembled breathless agreement. He gave it a name. Ghost. It didn't respond to it. But it never looked away when he said it. Ghost became a shadow. Not hunting. Not guarding. Just there. Sometimes bringing food. Sometimes watching from ledges. Sometimes pacing like it was thinking. The trust came slowly. When Rourke staggered from a collapsed tunnel one day, lungs burning with old radiation, Ghost didn't lunge to help but stood nearby, silent, tail low. When Rourke collapsed from dehydration, it brought water, retrieved from a pool deep in the underground system he hadn't dared enter. When a pack of feral mining drones attacked in the canyon, Ghost killed 3 before Rourke drew his knife. They weren't partners. But they were something close. He began training it. Not in obedience. In communication. Hand gestures. Eye contact. Movement cues. The first week, Ghost ignored him completely. The second, it started reacting to commands. By the third, it could flank left on a 2-finger wave, circle wide when Rourke dropped to a knee, stop cold when he raised a fist. Dominance wasn't forced. It was earned. And Ghost, the apex killer built in Dominion Labs, was learning what obedience meant when it was given freely. The transformation startled even Rourke. At night, when Ghost curled its massive frame beside the outer wall, Rourke sometimes caught himself staring too long at the glowing eyes. Not with fear. With wonder. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This thing had been built to eliminate him. He was a problem. A relic. A failed commander in exile. The Dominion had sent a weapon to erase him from the universe. But instead they delivered something far more dangerous. A second chance. A companion. An asset they no longer controlled. And somewhere out there, someone was still watching. Someone who expected a body, not silence. Someone who believed their monster was still loyal. One night, as the fire burned low and Ghost stood facing the eastern horizon, ears twitching at something only it could hear, Rourke spoke without looking up. They'll send more. When they don't hear back. When they realize their pet didn't report in. Ghost growled softly, almost as if it agreed. Next time, Rourke said, rising to his feet, we show them what loyalty really looks like. Ghost turned its head toward him. The wind changed. Far off, engines hummed against the sky. The days bled together like bruises across the horizon, each one darker than the last. What began as a tense standoff between man and monster had evolved into something unspoken, something built from firelight and shared kills, from silence and sharp glances that said more than language ever could. Rourke no longer questioned Ghost's loyalty. The beast hadn't been sent to serve, but it had learned to follow. Not from command but conviction. Rourke trained it without speaking. A flick of the wrist meant flank. 2 fingers to the earth meant hold. A whistle too low for human ears was stop. And Ghost listened. Not always the first time. But more than enough. It wasn't obedience that drove it, it was something deeper. Recognition. Trust. Ghost didn't act like a machine, though Rourke could still see the Dominion engineering glinting beneath its fur, along the ridge of its spine, woven like filament through muscle and bone. That made it more terrifying. It wasn't just born to kill. It had been sculpted. Programmed. Bound to Dominion protocols. And still it had chosen him. They moved through the ruins together now, not as predator and prey but as a unit. A new language bloomed between them in gestures, posture, breath. Rourke hadn't commanded anyone in months, but when Ghost followed him across a shattered bridge above a lava trench, responding to a single look, it scratched a part of his soul that had been caged since the court-martial. Then the sky changed. It started with a low vibration in the dust, barely noticeable. Then the clouds over the western crater began to twist, forming into a perfect spiral. Rourke looked up and knew immediately what it meant. Inbound dropship. Stealth grade. Dominion markings. They're early, he muttered. Ghost was already tense, eyes narrowed at the sky. Rourke knelt beside it and pressed his hand to the thick fur behind its jaw. The skin there was hotter than usual. Adrenaline maybe. Or anticipation. We've got 2 options, he said. We hide. Or we show them who you belong to now. Ghost didn't blink. He chose the second. They prepared that night. Rourke scouted the perimeter of the ruined barracks and mapped out fallback positions, explosive choke points and elevation advantages. He didn't have much, just a few improvised charges, scavenged power cells, and what remained of his old Dominion sidearm. But Ghost was worth 20 soldiers on his own. He watched the ship descend the next morning. Smooth. Silent. A gunmetal crescent slicing through the clouds. It hovered above the ash plain for a moment, as if deciding whether the terrain was worth contaminating, then sank down and opened its belly. 3 enforcers came out first, Zarn officers in polished obsidian armor. Insectoid. Tall. Their steps echoed against the stone as they advanced through the ruins. Behind them slithered a surveillance drone, shaped like a stingray with blinking blue eyes. They weren't searching. They knew where he was. He waited by the tower steps, standing tall with his weapon slung over his shoulder and Ghost crouched behind rubble on command. He timed everything. The wind. The light. The angle of surprise. One of the enforcers raised its voice, filtered and cold. Subject. Commander Elias Rourke. You were sentenced to termination. No signal has confirmed your death. The Biohound unit deployed to this location has not returned. Explain this anomaly. Rourke stepped forward and spat into the dust. Maybe your pet didn't like your leash. The drone hovered closer, recording every word. The central Zarn officer tilted its head. The Biohound was engineered without capacity for loyalty. It does not bond. It executes. Then you built it wrong. From behind the rubble, Ghost rose. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. The enforcers shifted immediately, weapons drawn, clicking into formation. But they hesitated when they saw the beast's stance, not crouched to strike but upright, proud, towering at full height. No growl. No threat. Just presence. It moved to Rourke's side and stood still. The drone scanned it rapidly. Beeped. Then whirred louder as it attempted a command override. Ghost didn't move. The lead enforcer hissed. You reprogrammed it. No, Rourke said, keeping his eyes locked on them. I didn't have to. The drone buzzed with more aggression now. A direct neural ping from orbit. That was Dominion protocol for an insubordinate asset. It should have dropped Ghost to the ground instantly. Should have fried his neurons and left a twitching corpse. Ghost didn't flinch. Instead, it took 1 step forward and growled. A deep, seismic vibration rolled through the ground. The drone blinked rapidly, confused. It had issued a termination order. But Ghost wasn't obeying. It was resisting. Rourke smiled without warmth. "See, you built a predator," he said. "But you forgot one thing." He snapped his fingers. Ghost lunged. The enforcers fired too late. Ghost hit the first one like a meteor, claws tearing through armor, jaw snapping down on a shriek before it could finish. The second turned and screamed in its tongue, but Rourke fired once, clean through the eye plate. The last enforcer managed to draw a blade, a curved thing crackling with energy. It slashed at Ghost's side, tearing a line across his flank. The beast roared and smashed the alien into a wall so hard the metal structure behind it collapsed. The drone tried to flee. Rourke raised his sidearm, aimed, and shot it clean from the air. Smoke filled the ruins. Blood pooled in broken stone. Ghost panted, flank heaving, but stood firm. Rourke moved beside him and crouched to examine the wound. Ugly, but survivable. "You good?" he asked. Ghost bumped his shoulder into Rourke's chest, a quiet press of weight and trust. The Dominion would not interpret silence kindly. They would see the dropped signal, the failed drone, and the dead enforcers as an act of defiance. And they would respond. Rourke looked at the destroyed bodies, the burning ship, and the beast at his side. "Now they know," he muttered. "You're not theirs anymore." Ghost turned his head toward the sky as if already sensing the next wave. And it would come. The Dominion returned before nightfall. Rourke knew they would. Not because of arrogance or pattern, but because the Zarn couldn't tolerate defiance. They didn't understand loyalty earned, only obedience enforced. A single biohound going rogue wasn't just a glitch. It was a threat to the very mythology they built their empire on: total control. A beast without a leash was a weapon waiting to point back at its maker. The ship that came wasn't a scout. It was a war barge. Matte black and bloated with purpose, humming low above the crater line like a predator waiting to strike. This one didn't land. It opened mid-air, spewing shapes like locusts. 24 soldiers in drop shells. Armored. Armed. Trained for extermination. They weren't here to ask questions. Rourke moved fast. Ghost was still wounded, limping slightly, but when the air shuddered with sonic booms and the smell of engine fuel filled the sky, the beast stood tall and silent. Not hesitant. Ready. They had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. They didn't have to win. They only had to be remembered. Rourke triggered the perimeter charges the second the first pod landed. The explosion lit the sky, shredding stone and dust into a storm of confusion. He moved through the chaos like he'd been born in it, calculating each motion, every breath measured. He wasn't the Rourke they'd exiled. He was the man they feared to court-martial publicly. The soldier who broke rank not because of weakness but because of principle. Ghost moved through the smoke like death incarnate, teeth flashing, claws gouging. It struck with surgical precision, never staying still, never letting its injury slow it. Its silence was terrifying. No roars. No snarls. Just the wet sound of violence. Rourke ducked beneath a plasma bolt and drove a salvaged blade through a Zarn soldier's chest. The armor cracked under the force. He turned, fired twice, dropping 2 more. Ghost leapt over a fallen turret and slammed into a group of enforcers, scattering them like toys. Still they kept coming. Still the ship hovered. Rourke's earpiece crackled. Not from his own equipment, he'd ripped that junk out weeks ago, but from the Dominion's command net, still open, still arrogant. He tapped in with a stolen codec, voice hard and sharp. "You sent a beast to kill me. And I named it." Silence followed. Then a voice replied. "Colt. Iborn. Dominion chain of command. It is defective. You are irrelevant." Rourke smiled through blood-slicked teeth. "Then come down here and say it." He cut the signal. Above him the ship shifted. Its underbelly opened wider. A new figure descended, not in armor, not in haste, but with regal stillness. A Dominion executor. Rourke had only ever seen one before. Always watching. Never acting. The last time it had delivered the purge order Rourke refused to follow. That memory etched itself behind his eyes. The executor touched down without sound. Pale silver robes billowing in the ash, its elongated limbs folded like razors around a chest of bone-white armor. Its eyes were black pearls, unreadable. Ghost growled then. "Oh." A sound born of hate. The executor ignored the bodies around it and looked directly at Rourke. "You've corrupted our creation." "No," Rourke said, stepping forward. "I set it free." The executor raised a single finger. Ghost lunged. The signal hit like a hammer. Rourke didn't see it, but he felt it. The sudden shift in pressure, the way Ghost's body seized midair, how it crashed hard into the ground and skidded, spasming in pain. Rourke screamed and ran to him. The executor turned calmly. It was always ours. It returns now to obedience. Ghost convulsed. Its eyes flashed with raw code, symbols running like blood over metal. Pain lanced through its limbs, its mind tearing at the Dominion's neural override. It had no words. Only instinct. An instinct said one thing: protect him. Rourke reached for Ghost, grabbed the sides of its jaw. Fight it, he said. You're not theirs anymore. Do you hear me? You are not theirs. The executor raised its arm again. Another signal. Stronger. Ghost screamed. Rourke did the only thing he could. He placed his hand on the jagged edge of the control node behind Ghost's ear. The Dominion's kill switch. Still buried deep in flesh and wire. He reached into the pouch at his hip, pulled a tool made from a melted capacitor blade and grit. Then he drove it in. Sparks burst. Ghost roared, a sound so violent it split the air. Blood poured from the wound. But the code stopped. The override died. The executor's eyes widened. Ghost rose slowly. It didn't shake. Didn't stagger. It looked straight into the executor's eyes and moved. There was no elegance. No mercy. It crashed into the alien like fury incarnate, claws tearing. The executor screamed, voice cracking into 6 distinct pitches as its body broke beneath the weight. Rourke watched, breath held, as the creature that had once been their most obedient weapon made its own decision. The Dominion ship began to rise. Retreat protocol. Cowards in orbit. Rourke fired his sidearm at it in vain. The bolt burned out before hitting the hull. But Ghost was already moving, faster than Rourke had ever seen. It sprinted across the ruins, bounded over fallen structures, climbed a broken satellite tower with monstrous speed and launched. Claws found grip. The ship bucked. Rourke shouted its name but Ghost didn't turn. It was already tearing through the underbelly, smashing through conduits and thrusters. The ship veered sideways, spiraling toward the ridge. A moment later it exploded, silently at first, then thunder rolling across the plains. A wall of heat slammed into the ruins, sending ash and fire skyward. Rourke ducked, shielded his face, heart thudding in his throat. Then silence. Real silence. He rose slowly, stumbling through smoke and wreckage. Flames licked the sky. Pieces of the Dominion vessel rained down like dying stars. And then, movement. A shape emerged from the fire. Limping. Burnt. Alive. Ghost. Half its fur was scorched away, one eye darkened, ribs visible through torn flesh. But it walked. It walked to him. Rourke dropped to his knees as Ghost collapsed at his feet. He placed a hand over its chest and felt the rise and fall, steady but shallow. You stupid bastard, he whispered. You could have died. Ghost blinked. What? He smiled, choking on the ash. But you didn't. Behind them the wreckage burned. No more drop pods came. No signals. No screams. Just fire and freedom. Ghost would survive. He had to. They both would. They had something to do now. The Dominion had called him irrelevant. But now, across 1,000 surveillance feeds, across every whisper network inside the enemy's empire, a new story would spread. The man who tamed the weapon. The human the beast chose. Rourke looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was still fighting. Still waiting for something to believe in. And now they had something. He rose, slowly, painfully, and looked down at the monster who'd once been sent to kill him. Let's go home. The stars were clearer now. No ships patrolled above. No drones circled. For the first time in months, maybe years, the sky felt empty. Free. Rourke sat beside Ghost, now resting with breath slow and steady. The beast was healing, but something in its silence felt off. Not broken, just focused, like it was listening to something he couldn't hear. Rourke had begun building a transmitter from Dominion wreckage. Not to call for help. That wasn't the kind of man he was anymore. No, this was a warning. To Earth. To the Resistance. He wanted them to know the truth, that the Dominion could bleed. That their greatest weapon had turned. That obedience had failed and loyalty had chosen a human instead. The console powered on with a low hum. Data flickered. Encrypted streams. Voice channels. Static. Then. A voice. Not alien. Human. Commander Rourke. You're out of position. He froze. The voice wasn't just human. It was familiar. General Reeve. His old CO. The same man who'd testified at Rourke's court-martial. The same man who'd nodded when they dragged him away. Rourke leaned in. How the hell did you get this frequency? The voice was steady. Cold. We never lost you, Elias. You were never out of reach. Cernix 9 wasn't Exile. It was containment. Static cracked. Then another voice cut in, female, clipped, clinical. Project Osiris logs confirm Subject 13 has achieved full imprint loyalty. Neural overrides removed by Subject 1 with acceptable loss ratio. Phase 2 protocol verified. Rourke's stomach dropped. Subject 13. Ghost. He looked over at the beast, now watching him carefully. You used me, he whispered. You planted it here. The male voice returned. We didn't plant it. We built it for you. Ghost stood. Slowly. No growl. No snarl. Just waiting. We knew what the Dominion would do, Reeve said. They'd send a biohound to clean up the mess. So we got there first. Installed the seed. Adjusted the imprint logic. All we needed was one human they couldn't control. One they'd try to erase. Rourke stared at Ghost like he'd never seen him before. You made me its test. You made yourself that, Reeve said. You disobeyed a purge order. You went rogue. And we saw potential in that. You gave it something the Dominion couldn't. Not command. Not control. Purpose. Rourke's fists clenched. I thought it chose me. It did, Reeve replied. We just helped it know why. The channel went silent. Ghost took a step closer, eyes still soft. Not threatening. Still loyal. But the truth had landed like a blade between them. Rourke rose slowly. So what now? He asked the firelit void. You want your weapon back? Another voice broke through. No, Commander. We want you both. He looked to the sky. And there, rising over the ridge, were Earth ships. Not just scouts. Warships. Bigger than any he'd seen since the First War. They hadn't come to rescue him. They'd come to collect what they'd built. And if he didn't play along, they'd make Ghost choose again. Rourke stared at the blinking lights overhead, then back at the beast beside him. It waited. And in that moment he realized the fight wasn't over. It had just changed masters. But this time he wouldn't be anyone's pawn. Not Dominion. Not Earth Command. Not ever again. He turned to Ghost and said quietly, One more war? The beast growled. This time not in pain. In agreement.